I've been an avid reader of Vanessa Grigoriadis' journalism for years and years and years. Basically, as long as I have been aware of pop culture, she has been the person telling me about pop culture. She's been published in every magazine. She's a contributing editor right now to the New York Times Magazine and Vanity Fair. And as far as I'm concerned, she's the best profile writer out there. Her prose is clear, it's gorgeous, she has a laser eye for what people want to hide, and she has empathy with the desire to hide it, which I cannot imagine a better combination than that for a book like Blurred Lines. In Blurred Lines, Grigoriadis writes about sexual assault and consent on college campuses. She talks to dozens of students and their parents and their administrators. She picks through piles of statistics, and she comes out the other side with clear-headed advice for students and for campuses alike. And somehow she makes it all incredibly readable. It's sad, but not only sad. It's everything I hoped it would be. I swallowed it up in a matter of days, and I hope you will too. So please join me to welcome her to Politics and Prose.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming. This is my first book, so this is really exciting for me to look out in a crowd and see all these faces of people who came to hear me speak about Blurred Lines, which is my investigation of 3 years into sex and sexual assault across American universities. And the book is about ethical sex. It's about the new rules of sex on campus. It's about how students are now figuring out negotiating how to have sex that is thoughtful and compassionate, leaves the partner feeling more self-esteem versus less self-esteem. And we grew up, a lot of us, in a country that didn't really promote that. But right now there's a vast transition going on college campuses. So I am a bit older to be doing this. I am a Gen Xer. I'm a mom of 2 kids. I had to use my babysitter, who's 24 years old. I took her driver's license to go into frat parties because I was like, well, everybody's going to say, like, this ID is so fake. How could you possibly be this age? But I did put a backpack on. The book is primarily written, I think, with a lot of cultural references for people who are a bit older, for primarily parents to learn how to protect their daughters from being assaulted and to think about how to talk to their sons about being not accused of assault as well. And so I started this in 2014 in the summer when I began reporting for New York Magazine on campus sexual assault. And I went to Columbia University. There were a number of students there who had been very outspoken about their experiences with the university. They felt that the university had really wronged them, had not taken their claims seriously, and they were starting to go to the media with those stories. And Emma Sulkowicz was one of those people. So I met her in a cafe, French Roast, if anybody knows that, downtown in Manhattan, which is a cafe that's been there for many decades and is now leaving, as everything cool in New York is doing, shutting down. But she told me her story, and in the course of the conversation, she said, listen, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to carry this mattress around, and I'm going to carry it around for the whole year unless Columbia expels the boy who I think raped me, or until graduation. And I said, that's a crazy idea. That is an amazing idea. I cannot believe that. You know what? You should give me a call when you do that. I'd like to see that. Give me a call. And then I went about my way and, did whatever I was doing in my life. Lo and behold, I didn't know that this was going to become the biggest viral sensation of fall 2014 and be everywhere from Vice News to Al Jazeera to papers in, multiple foreign languages. So her story really blew up. And this cover is called A Very Different Kind of Sexual Revolution on Campus. So what's the problem with sexual assault? The main problem is, my book is focused primarily on heterosexual experiences, although many of the people in the book are not heterosexual. The experiences that I focus on, because I'm very interested in gender norms and toxic masculinity and the way that fuels sexual assault, I will be talking mostly about women and men in those ways. So that's the disclaimer there. So women tend to not speak about these cases. Men who are victimized also speak even less, right? Because to be victimized by a man, if you are a man, is really something that's not talked about. So they don't speak, and men don't see. They don't like to see that sexual assault exists. They don't want to really hear about those experiences. They don't want to think about what they're doing that might cross the line. They just want to close their eyes to it. And that has been the situation for a long time, but it's changing. So at Columbia, the group of survivors that I was speaking with, alleged survivors in some cases, were, they had started a group called No Red Tape. And the name of that group was specifically referring to all the red tape that the university was making them do in order to try to get justice. So fill out these forms, come for an interview. Oh, you have to come for an interview now over the summer. I'm sorry you went home to Colorado. Can't you do a Skype interview? Oh, you have a job at an internship? Well, you got to miss that day. Well, and, you know, the kid would say, well, but no, I mean, I don't know if my boss will let me off. I would say, well, we're going to close your case otherwise. So it seems that Columbia was, at the very least, slow-footing a lot of cases that they shouldn't have been. So that was what the red tape referred to, but these activists were extremely smart. They were not only uber organized, but they were very good at branding. So they thought of this notion of silence and the red tape and alma mater, which is the statue that, if you've been to Columbia's campus, is in the middle of Columbia's campus on the steps of Low Library. It's 8 feet tall. It's Athena in academic garb. And it's the icon of Columbia. It's on, you know, all the literature. It's the mother soul who was supposed to provide nourishment to the young sons as they learned to be leaders in the world. So this was a trope that they used in a lot of their rallies. So this is an early rally. They were very angry that the deans were in the line of decision making about whether cases should be, you know, found in a survivor's interest. And many students brought out all sorts of mattresses from their apartments up in the high rises of Columbia and Morningside Heights. They brought them out. This was another very organized rally where each student group, from the Justice in Palestine group to the Queer Army to the Swing group, each got a mattress, and they put the names of their groups on the mattress. So don't rape. So that's the primary message of this new wave of activism. We don't want to hear about don't get raped. We don't want to hear about what we did wrong. Let's talk about the behavior that led to the problem. This was the end of this rally. At the end of the rally, the students said, okay, everybody's going to proceed in a long line and chant no justice, no peace, and we're going to go to Columbia President Lee Bollinger's house, and we're going to dump these mattresses in his lawn. And everybody's like, yes! And so we all walked over there, and then, of course, they were really organized, so they stacked the mattresses really nicely. There was no dumping here. So where did this all come from? As many of you know, it came from the Title IX, 1972 statute. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So no discrimination on the basis of gender. If you want to get those funds for your university, which almost every university in America needs. We all know that this expanded, the amount of equipment that women's sports should have versus men's sports, that it regulates harassment. Of course, it also regulates sexual assault, but it wasn't until Obama came into office that these powers were certainly there, but he did embolden his Office for Civil Rights, which is the the group that deals with discrimination on campus, to really get into the issue and really make sure the universities were doing the right thing. He was joined by Joe Biden, who really wanted to make sure that his legacy was not getting Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, but his legacy was about Violence Against Women Act, was about protecting young girls on campus. But would any of this have really happened without the students? So if you hear the students' narrative, they're not so sure that the Office for Civil Rights was going to follow through, because until they started doing their own activism. So they started not only filing Title IX complaints, but also going to Capitol Hill with petitions. This is Alexandra Brodsky from Know Your Nine, a very influential young activist group. They also started going to the media. And these two women are the founders of End Rape on Campus. They are from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. All these women were fierce and intelligent and masterful political operatives. They, along with others, would read campus newspapers online. There was an upswelling, right, of students speaking out and saying, I was sexually assaulted. My university did nothing. I'm going to tell my story to the campus newspaper. These activists would get in touch with that person. They would say, tell us your story. And we also have a media contact for you. We'd like you to talk to this media contact. We'd like to get your story out there for everybody to read. So many of the stories that you read were done in an organized fashion. Also, many of the federal complaints that got processed. This is an early slide. 55 schools are under federal investigation for sexual assault. So these Title IX complaints that primarily students, many others, but students were mostly writing, saying, this is what my school did wrong. They did not process my claim in the amount of time, or this is my story. Please help me. There are now over 300 of these complaints. There are activists and lawyers out there who are very happy to help anybody who wants to write a complaint. So I began my research at Wesleyan University, which is where I went to school. I was there 20 years after I graduated, and this is a rally that they had there with a woman named Carmen Ife, who was very influential in getting the fraternities shut down at Wesleyan. It's a little more complicated than that, but there was a fraternity, if anybody knows, a co-ed fraternity called Eclectic, that she was very, very influential in getting kind of temporarily shut down. But Wesleyan no longer has all male fraternities. And you might be surprised because it's Wesleyan, it's a progressive school, but they have had these and they have been holdouts, and they were closed down directly because of the sexual assault that was maybe not going on specifically in those fraternities, but was happening after those parties, was happening involving students who were connected to them, and the activism that went on that campus to really shut it down. So you can read all about that in my book. I'm trying to find this portion that I was going to read. So when I went to Wesleyan, it was 20 years since I had been there, and at the same time, it was similar in a lot of ways, my Yield alma mater. Youth cultures, I'm going to read a little bit now. Youth culture's 20-year nostalgia cycle was coming back right around that time, and the school was awash in Doc Marten boots, velvet chokers, Converse high tops, plaid flannel shirts, shoulder-slung mini backpacks. Sonic youth patches were no longer sewn to the backpack's front pockets. Instead, plastic water bottles are now banned here, and those pockets often dangle a carabined steel canteen. Not only do these students look the same, they also talk urgently about many of the same issues, in particular sexual assault. Economic inequality, destabilization in the Middle East, access to guns? No, students here don't talk about that much. Racism, sexism, gay rights, trans rights, and sexual assault, these topics are constant. But the way that they talk about them are very different. Debates about what is consensual and what is not, what type of sex is ethical and what is immoral, are essential to life at Wesleyan today. One student said to me, "There's a difference between illegal and unethical. Life is not about doing whatever you can do. It's about not doing what is traumatic to another person." So after I went to Wesleyan, I thought it would be really interesting to go to a counterpoint school. So I decided to go to Syracuse University, which I thought was going to be really close because it was in New York, but it was actually 5 hours away from New York City and very hard to get to and very, very, very cold. So could have gone to Ole Miss, but I did end up at Syracuse, where I interviewed a lot of sorority sisters. And they had a very different perspective on sex in college and what should be considered sexual assault. So I'm going to read a passage about a woman who uses the pseudonym Blackout Blonde. "Hookups in college are fun," she tells me. "After all, if they weren't, why would so many people have them? At a time when every type of music has been discovered and every pierced and tattooed subculture brought into the commercial fold, semi-anonymous or mostly anonymous sex with someone you barely know is a wild experience, one of the few forms of rebellion left for youth in America. At least on the surface, Blackout Blonde is pro-girl, admonishing frat brothers for being cheap and serving warm Keystone beer at parties because they know girls will dry hump each other on the speaker system no matter how little they spend on liquor. But she does ultimately recount some experiences that belie her pro-hookup line. One time, she told me, when she was making out with a Sigma Alpha Epsilon brother in an alleyway behind a frat party, he started to squeeze and manhandle her too aggressively. She took off a heel with one hand and hit him in the head with it, then ran down the stairs. As she descended, she called a friend and yelled into the receiver, "I'm like Cinderella escaping the prince!" Another night had a murkier, more troubling denouement. She was hanging out with a fifth-year senior, a hockey player, at his house. But all she can remember is doing keg stands to a Taylor Swift song. I was a sophomore, and he was so much older. So that made me really like him and think he was really cool. But I don't know what happened that night, she says. In the morning, she woke up in bed with him wearing his boxers. She couldn't find her clothes at first, and then she looked between the mattress and the wall, and she saw her outfit sandwiched there. That was a weird place for her clothes to be, unless the two of them had hooked up, she thought. Clothes don't usually get smashed between a mattress and a wall unless somebody pushes them hard off the bed in the middle of sex. So the guy kept saying, "Don't worry. I was too drunk last night to screw Blake Lively, okay? Acting all don't flatter yourself." Well, A, I appreciate the comparison to Blake Lively, but B, I think he at least tried. After a ton of searching, I found my phone and I was out of there. I was in such a rush, I even forgot one of my layers at his house. She smirks. And I was pissed, because that was a nice top from Urban Outfitters. I ask if she thinks of herself as a rape survivor. "No way," she says. "As far as I'm concerned, there's only one person to blame in that situation, and his name is Jose Cuervo." Sorry, that was hard for me to say. Okay, so we have some very different perspectives here on what's going on. So this is a sign that was held up in Stanford's graduation ceremony. In my book, I not only talk about different perspectives on whether you were raped or not, what Blackout Blonde wants to blame on Jose Cuervo, and what she wants to decide happened to her and integrate into her personality and character. But I talk about the idea that rape has become a very powerful language. This is a kind of typical idea, millennial idea, right? what to expect when you're sexually assaulted on campus. Well, no, let's call that raped. People will be really upset for 2 whole weeks. You're more likely to be raped than stick with your major. Just because they wanted to Netflix doesn't mean you wanted to chill. People may be shocked to learn that 50% of the time, rape doesn't involve alcohol. You will probably see your offender in the dining hall tomorrow. So, many Americans think of rape as a physically violent act of penetration. That's rape. If it didn't happen that way, ipso facto, not rape. Sexual assault doesn't have to involve penetration. We've all heard the stories about, oh, well, some guy just grabbed her butt in the dining hall and she called it sexual assault. No, I mean, anybody who's going to call it sexual assault is going to be a little more graphic. I mean, a little, more upsetting than that. But it is true that the definition of sexual assault did start to expand. And for this generation, and I do think it's a generational difference, it also included these kinds of speech that are patently offensive. So these are some signs that we're hanging outside a fraternity. Rowdy and fun, hope your baby girl is ready for a good time. Freshman daughter drop off, go ahead and drop off mom too. So this was a very interesting movement. Lots of things were happening, an ideology being created, connections to 2 of the most important men in America. All sorts of awesome stuff was happening. And then this happened. And this is UVA's story about the rape at the University of Virginia. And so I think we all probably remember, but it was described as an extremely violent rape by 7 men at a fraternity during a fraternity pledge ritual. The woman was fell down pushed down on a glass table. The table shattered beneath her. When everything was over, she ran from the room at 3 o'clock in the morning, shoeless. She saw some of her friends, and she said, oh, my God, I can't believe this just happened to me. I've been raped. And they said, well, you shouldn't really tell anybody because don't you still want to go to frat parties? You're going to be ostracized. So this story ended up being not true. Why was it not true? In part because it was an unbelievable story, because there's not a lot of 7 attacker gang rape in a fraternity pledge ritual going on campuses. There's a lot of really messed up stuff going on. But this was a story that took all of the most violent tropes, married them with the idea of a corrupt Southern school that wanted to protect boys who, had really done wrong. And it really set back the movement on campus in an extraordinary way, particularly the media movement. So when I went to Wesleyan, the students there told me that they sometimes like to call themselves the witches. And I met several groups of students who said this. And, young women like to call themselves witches. That's part of something that's happened for a while. But they, explained it as they not only had the sorcery to upend societal orders, but they were also being unfairly victimized. So that's why they like that. But now we have a new group of students who want this term, and they started to claim this term. And they were the accused boys. This is a witch hunt, no different than the Salem witch trials or McCarthyism. A fear has been sold to the country, this is the mom of an accused boy speaking, that every man is a potential rapist. This is now an American truth, just the way the communists infiltrating and taking over our country was a truth of McCarthyism. For our American boys today, it's guilty before innocent. So this group of people were not so interested in the gradations of what rape is and should we call this sexual assault? Should we call it sexual misconduct? Should we call it rape? What is the symbolism of each of those words? All they wanted to talk about in not every case, but many of the cases, was this: women lie. They're not telling the truth. Boys didn't do anything wrong. I did speak with families of the accused, and I will say that several of them said, you know what? I don't think that we would say that our boys used their best judgment on the night in question. But there's a big difference between being 18 or 19 years old and not having good judgment and being a criminal with intent to harm. The question of not good judgment and when that crosses into being a sexual assaulter is a very interesting question to contemplate. After the UVA story blew up, Phi Psi, the fraternity, which has been exonerated, right, in the story, began to mobilize behind the scenes. And they got together with some other fraternities, and they started talking about what they could do to make sure that frats were protected from this sexual assault issue that they realized was becoming the kind of issue that was not only going to shut down frats at a place like Wesleyan, but could actually threaten them at a place like UVA, right? Let's remember that the president of UVA shut down all the frats for the rest of the semester when the Rolling Stone story came out and said the Greek system has to think a lot about what they've done. So we had the frats mobilizing. They were getting together with different conservatives on Capitol Hill. Trent Lott became their lobbyist. They started to say, how can we roll back these protections of Obama's emboldening of the OCR? How can we start saying, let's get rid of the 2011 Dear Colleague letter? I'm sure some of you know that libertarians are also interested in this. There's a lot of concern about due process and campus courts. This woman is the mom of a falsely accused boy from the University of North Dakota. She is a history teacher in Fargo, and she was a leader of her teachers union, and she started a group called Families Advocating for Campus Equality. And this became a very instrumental group in putting out stories into the media of boys who were falsely accused, getting lawsuits to start going against the colleges for throwing out boys that they felt were falsely accused. Ultimately, they met with Betsy DeVos in July. They are one of the groups, when you hear about men's rights activists, met with Betsy DeVos for an hour and a half. This is one of the groups. I wouldn't really call them men's rights activists, but they consider themselves to be stakeholders. The last time I was in D.C., I was meeting with them, and they were trying to lobby on Capitol Hill, and nobody would meet with them from, the progressive side. Basically, I mean, they could obviously see the people from the states that they were coming from. But, they said to me, we just want a seat at the table. And they couldn't get a seat at the table, but now they have a real seat at the table. So this is Joshua Strange. He was one of the boys who first came out with his name from Auburn University. And his mom said to me, he wants to go into politics. And I said to him, Josh, if you want to go into politics, you better own your story like a three-piece suit. You put that on like a seersucker suit with a bow tie, and you tell your story, because otherwise it's going to haunt you forever. So this was all going on kind of behind the scenes, right? And then we all know that this happened. And when this happened, the game started really changing, right? So a lot of my book is not only, about actually getting on campuses and interviewing students and trying to understand where they're coming from on this issue, but really following the arc of the whole kind of epic narrative that's happened since 2011 up to today and continues today, this fight over what the protections for sexual assault should be on campus. So I actually kind of feel bad showing this slide now because this is Betsy DeVos. But I have to say that for all of the talk about potential grizzlies, the speech that she made a couple of days ago at George Mason University was extremely impressive and eloquent. And while I was reporting, I said to people, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And people who study the religious right said, no. That's the act. She's the wealthiest, most important religious rights supporter in America. She is extremely smart and actually really knows what she wants to do. And behind the scenes, she's working it. So I don't think that anybody could listen to her speech and think that that was only written by the conservative and libertarian lawyers that were at George Mason University with her at the Scalia Law Center. She also really is thinking about this issue and thinking about what she wants to do. She's positioned herself very well as Mrs. Mom, right? I have 2 sons. I have 2 daughters. I'm thinking about this in the most rational way possible. I just want to protect everybody. And at the same time, she has as the acting leader of her Office for Civil Rights, Candace Jackson. So Candace Jackson is a 40-something lawyer who, you know, is very interested in reverse discrimination, has been very interested in hating Hillary Clinton. She's been on top of the anti-Clinton machine for decades now. And she's holding a copy of her book called Their Lives, and that is a book about these 3 women who accused Bill Clinton of rape. And you may have seen her in the press conference before the debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, where there was a press conference, right? She's kind of like a conservative Gloria Allred. And she came out with these women and said, now I'm going to accompany these women to the front row. So that's where they sat, and there she is. I'll leave more discussion of what's just happened in the last few days for the questions. But so we're now in a situation where, just to roll back to Emma Sulkowicz, this was the graduation day at Columbia, and she did indeed carry that mattress to graduation, even though an email was sent to all graduating seniors a couple of days before that said, please do not bring large objects to the ceremony. Not only that, large objects that could cause discomfort to others to this ceremony. Please don't bring them. But she did bring it. And at the same time, a band of anonymous bandits came and wheat pasted these posters all over Morningside Heights in Columbia on the graduation day. And this is the same shot, right, from the New York Magazine story that said a very different sexual revolution on campus. And this one is called Pretty Little Liar. So even now, with all of this that's going on, the movement does go on. It does go on at Syracuse. It does go on in sororities. It does go on among young women and men who want to establish kind of new boundaries for what consensual sex should consist of. I'm sure a lot of you know about Yes Means Yes, which is a law in many states. In New York, all private and public colleges have it, right? California, Connecticut, Illinois all have a form of affirmative consent, which means like silence is not consent. A no doesn't have to come out of somebody's mouth. You must get active consent, right? You must get a yes. Universities have been particularly interested in this because of the alcohol component, right? Because even though I said 50% don't involve alcohol, well, the other 50 do involve alcohol, right? And this question of how intoxicated were you, it becomes a lot easier of a question to answer if you weren't able to say yes. If the guy, look, people are going to lie, of course. We know that. They're going to abuse this. But you need to get a yes from somebody, well, that person can't be on her way to passing out, right? Or she can't be completely passed out cold. So now we're in this really interesting situation. And this is a 1,000-person Washington Post Kaiser Family Foundation poll. I'm sorry, I'm sure a lot of you can't see it. But they asked these 1,000 college students, what constitutes consent? Do you think if a person does this, this establishes consent to sexual activity? Nods in agreement. Half of them said yes, half said no. Takes off their own clothes. Half said yes, half said no. Gets a condom. 40% said yes. over 54% said no, right? That's the Gen X thing. Once a condom's out, boom, it's consent. Engages in foreplay such as kissing and touching, only 22% said yes. So you're not going all the way if you're just kissing, right? That's no consent. Not just because I came to this apartment and I kissed you, that doesn't mean we're having sexual intercourse. Does not say no. Only 18% said that is consent. So 77% said you have to get a yes. That is a radical change, right? And that's just happened the last few years. So where are we now? We have this word out there. This is a great zeitgeist word, consent. Nobody really has the same definition. We're trying to figure it out. Students love this word. It's really interesting to the undergraduate mind. It's interesting to my mind, you know? What is it and what is it going to be going forward? And that is really the question I think that needs to be answered right now. So thank you very much, and I'll take your questions. So thanks. Thank you. I don't know if this is...
So I'm interested in a whole bunch of processes.
Okay.
But because I saw the Title IX definition, and I'm thinking, how does that really apply to sexual assault?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't there why does, and this is a question, why is it assumed that a college student would go through school instead of making a report to the police? There are laws on the books, and so it seems to me, why is Title IX in a convoluted way basically in charge of sexual assault?
Okay, so I'll try to piecemeal that out because that's a bunch of different issues. But so Title IX, you know, is about protecting from sexual harassment, and sexual assault comes under the umbrella of sexual harassment. Certainly, we're trying to think about this issue on campus now a little bit like sexual harassment in the workplace, right? What makes a campus so different? I mean, people are there to get an education, right? They're not there for a party, although, I mean, sometimes they are there for a party. But if you think about it in that way, you know, okay, so I am pro campus court. And I have gone for, I myself have vacillated on this because I'm not blind. No journalist alive could read some of the complaints that are coming out of the campus courts and not say that some innocent boys are getting punished. Okay? It's true. But much more often, when you actually go to the victim statements, and you actually read the victim statements that are not in contention and what the boy says happened, you find that it goes back to what that mom said. That was not my best judgment. These aren't nice stories. These aren't UVA stories. These aren't complete falsehoods. These are really nasty situations. And whether they were consensual or not has a lot to do with what you think consent really is. So and those are the ones that are marginal. Remember, there are a lot of ones that are very cut and dry.
No, I'm for an informed process, not necessarily a school. But I'm wondering, when something happens, is an individual mandated to go through school? How does it happen that people decide to go through the school process?
Well, I think the issue is that going to the cops is just complicated, right? Because first of all, cops don't have a great track record with rape, right? Remember also I said that a lot of these acts are not physically violent. Even physically violent acts in rape don't always create a lot of physical evidence, right? And without evidence, what are cops going to do? How the decision is made by the student?
Yes.
Well, I mean, look, a student can either go to the cops or go to the school. Like, it's up to the student, right? It is up to the student. Yeah. I think that just students do opt for people tend to opt for the least traumatic option, right? Like, what's the lowest option? This was part of what the problem was at UVA. Because let's not forget that UVA was actually having a problem with sexual assault. And that's part of why that reporter went there. She got the wrong story. But as somebody said to me There was something in the air. She almost got it, right? Because they were saying to victims, oh, here are your options. You could go to the cops, or you could go to this formal process. It's going to be real hard, lots of red tape, blah, 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 blah. Or you could just do it informally. We could just like talk about it a little. Which one do you want? People wanted the lowest one because they wanted the least traumatic experience. So they don't do that anymore.
Hi. My daughter just turned 17, and she just left for college in a small school in Cincinnati, Ohio, called Xavier University. And I don't know how to talk to her about the chance of this possibly happening. She got there, I think, the second week of August, and she's already been going to parties off campus. People have been, the older boys who don't know that she's 17, ask her to come to their apartments for parties, and I'm sure other women are there, but I'm at a loss for how to respond without going up there and doing something that would get on national news. Because if my daughter calls me,
Right.
if she calls me and says, you know, what happened at Stanford University with that boy happens to her, you know, I don't want it to go that far. But, you know, like you just said a few minutes ago, I have zero confidence in the police in anywhere. So that's not even going to be a resource. Does your book talk about how fathers can talk to their daughters?
So she's at Xavier University. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Which state is it?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, Cincinnati, Ohio. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if they have that law. I mean, I do think that parents can really talk about this concept of yes means yes, because it's in the student conduct codes, and it's a way of talking to kids without getting into a nitty-gritty conversation. It's just saying, look, you're in college now. Here's some new rules about sex on campus. They're in your student code. I want you to read them, and then I want to talk about it. I think that's a really easy way to do it. I'm not sure if that's the case at that school. But I do have to say that, you know, this is kind of advice that's as old as time, but it's the girl code. And this is what the students at Syracuse talked about. You come to the party together, you leave together. Something doesn't feel right in your gut, you leave immediately. You know, you trust your instinct. A lot of women who have gone through this find that really instinctually they started to feel something was not quite right before it happened. So I think that's important. I mean, in terms of alcohol, I do think it's important to get the message across that, you know, a couple of drinks is okay, but a million rum and cokes, you know, over 9 drinks. There's data that shows that over 9 drinks, which is 9 drinks is a lot for a young woman. You know, a lot of people are going to be passed out from that. And there's a much higher possibility of sexual assault then. And that, you know, being at the actual frat party isn't, I mean, this is another thing. It's true. You're right. Like, you're identifying the problem, which is being at the frat party isn't really the problem, right? This concept of the UVA story, it happened upstairs during the party with all these guys there. Not really, but it's after the frat party. It is the off-campus house. It's not always the older guys, interestingly. It is sometimes the younger guys, you know, because it's about guys who are just like, well, I got this girl here and just kind of want to take advantage of it. So I think that as soon as you go, as somebody said to me, indoor lit environments, she should not be frightened walking from the library to her dorm. This idea of, you know, being on the path and scary things are going to happen and people are going to jump out of bushes. I mean, the last thing I would say is that I'm very interested in bringing back self-defense, which is really not on college campuses today in any major way. And girls should know that if they do get into a situation where things are going wrong, that the best thing to do is to assert yourself, physically push somebody away, try to create space between you and somebody else. Say, back off and push the person away. Even if you don't know some like real self-defense tip, everybody can do that, you know? So I do talk about some of those tips. But also, remember, like, it happens to a lot of people, but it doesn't happen to everybody. It's not around every corner. Not everybody's bad. And, you also have to have faith that your kid has a good head on her shoulders.
Well, I'll say this. One of the concerns I have regarding her is a lot of people, especially a lot of boys, tell her she's very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And she thinks they're telling me I'm so pretty, that maybe they want to go out with her. And I told her, don't fall into that. Be humble that you are very pretty, but don't feel that you have to go off campus to a party or that you have to do anything that some boy may want you to do. You don't have to do that.
Right.
So I'm trying to ease into that conversation.
Right.
So,
Cool.
thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
So I first came across your writing about 10 years ago with the tragedy of Britney Spears article you wrote
Yeah.
for Rolling Stone. It was at a time when Britney was very clearly suffering. It was obvious to the general public. And I'm wondering, if you were to make sort of a 10 years later sequel to that article, what observations might you make both in terms of how Britney has fared and how the crucible of fame for the famous, I think you described it as, has evolved for better or worse in the past decade?
Well, first of all, I would say that, I do think you said Britney has suffered, and I have thought about that story and realized that I might have been a little too interested in her as like a theory, I do think that I could have been a little more sympathetic to her, which is criticism that has been leveled against me, for that story. So I think that, when I think about Britney today, I think about her as kind of closing a chapter of kind of manufactured pop stardom, and also like a kind of like a young female sexuality that was very controlled by men, and kind of her downfall coincided with the rise of with the election of Obama and the rise of pop feminism. Somebody said to me, and I was like, I wish I had thought of that line. They were like, out of the ashes of Britney's extensions that she took off in the, she cut off in the valley in that like tattoo shop or barber shop, whatever it was, rose pop feminism and Beyonce and Taylor Swift and all these people. But it is really true that we entered an era of girl power, of women becoming like one woman, women stars becoming like one woman entertainment conglomerates without a lot of kind of, Svengalis around running their own shows, and, speaking about, I'm a badass, don't mess with me, right? I do, if I look sexualized to you, I'm doing it to myself. No guy told me to do it. That's at least what they're saying. So, yeah, in terms of fame, obviously we're like in this insane time where everybody wants to be famous, and we have a celebrity as president, and part of why he got to be president is not, unrelated to his fame and people's desire to be, seduced by a celebrity and that lifestyle. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question. Well, thank you. And
Thank
you for the book.
Thank you so much.
I have a question regarding this topic. Regarding Betsy DeVos and her appointment in the Department of Education. Do you think that she will be encouraging colleges and fraternities, and I think you said the men's movement or something like that, either financially, or are colleges, do you think they'll go the direction of supporting, protecting men,
Yeah,
or protecting fraternities at this point?
No, definitely. I do, yeah.
And how do you think the long-term effect will be of her tenure?
Yeah.
on this
I mean,
her
so
speech.
again, I thought her speech was very good, and I do think that she makes some very good points, and I think she is thinking seriously about the issue. I think the question is, what does she consider to be consent? I'd be interested to know, because her deputy, the one that I showed the picture of, who wrote the book about Clinton, she's on the record telling the New York Times that she believes 90% of these cases are, quote, we were both drunk, quote, we were going out, and 6 months later, I decided there was something about us sleeping together the last night that was just not quite right. So actually, the most interesting thing she said in that New York Times interview was that I found was in most of these cases, she was upset about this, there is not even an allegation that the young man overrode the will of the young woman. Well, what's that about? I think we all know what will is code for. Will is code for maybe even resistance. I thought we were over that, right? That women had to resist, or will means physical violence, right? So I think the murkiness of the campus courts and the question of where the line between consent and non-consent lies, she's thinking about those things. But ultimately, the only idea that I heard in her speech was this idea of a centralized reporting system that would probably be run by, former criminal prosecutors. And, what are they really going to be interested in? Aren't they going to be interested in, blood and bruises? Are they really going to be interested in these gradations of consent and about sexual empowerment of young women? I find that hard to believe, although, she could surprise us. I mean, she, is a conservative Christian and should be interested in morality in that, in that arena. So, but that would be my assumption. Yeah.
I liked the first quote you had where someone was talking about colleges and the question that you just alluded to about illegal, not versus ethics, but illegal and ethics as two sides of this. I think colleges and universities as institutions are probably inept at legal matters.
Right.
Until the rash of the UVA things, a lot of the complaints about campus courts were that they were not aggressive enough on the part of victims and everything.
Right.
And then you figured out who was on those campus courts, and it's not necessarily people involved in HR matters or that kind of thing. So having said that, the one thing that I do think colleges and universities are pretty good at is setting expectations, whether it's norms of academic performance or academic ethics and that sort of thing. So who's doing it right? If you think that campus courts are overall a plus, what kind of model or what makes the difference between an effective campus court versus ones that haven't been working?
Okay, so I think that it's taken some time for them to get it right, and not every school is getting it right, of course. At Columbia now, you get an attorney, whichever side you're on. The university supplies an attorney for you. The University of Iowa, I looked at their setup the other day. It's awesome. These are the protections for the victim. These are the protections for the accused. There are a lot of former lawyers, current lawyers or former lawyers who are getting these jobs. A lot of these jobs are really well paid. Some of these are 6-figure jobs, So it's not all just people from HR and from the library. It is people who are being trained in the specific kind of skill that they need to have to judge these cases. And I mean, I had an investigator say to me, a Title IX investigator say to me, I think the people who are applying for the jobs, and many of them are coming now with a legal background, they're really good and they're flexible in their thinking, and they really want to do the job and they want to do a good job. It's the people who are voluntold by the university because the university doesn't want to pay for somebody new. So, oh, hey, you do student affairs. Why don't you also do these Title IX investigations that, like, you basically almost have to be a private detective to run? That's where they're getting into a lot of trouble. So, I support it because it's a system that we've just put together a few years ago. Universities are just starting to get it right. And to blow it all up right now, for what's the alternative? Again, like, I don't know what the alternative is, because I don't think it's the police and district attorneys. So, I want to hear more about what else we're going to do before we move away from this.
We have time for 2 more quick questions, one on each mic.
Hi. I wonder, where are we on consent education? And is that the crux of the issue, that if we educated kids on campuses and high schools and on down, I mean, boys, girls, everybody, that's the right place to start?
Yeah. I mean, I think that so first of all, Betsy DeVos can't do anything about that because that's legislated. There has to be education on campus. The issue is that once kids get to college, they're already socialized in all these weird norms that say, like, a boy just has to push until he gets the girl to comply because that's what a real man does. And, like, don't you want to be a real man? Like, that kind of stuff is already really in people's heads. So they're having a hard time with a lot of it in colleges. There are some programs, like the University of New Hampshire is a big leader in this, University of Kentucky. They're coming out with, like, interesting, innovative programs, but there's a lot of programs that aren't really working. And California has just mandated that education has to start in high school. And that's awesome, right? That's really where it should start. Sex ed should not be just about, like, pictures of STDs and, like, you put a condom on a banana. It should be about, like, what is consent? How do you get it? How do you act responsibly towards your fellow, partner here? So I think you're going to start seeing that more and more. I think there's going to be resistance in religious pockets of the country to that, but I do think that's going to start happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you mind talking really quickly about the role of college athletics and athletic departments in covering up assaults?
Yeah. So I'm one of these people who is, like, slightly skeptical all the time, right? So I said, well, come on, is this really going on in football teams? Like, I really want to look into this and see if this is really going on. And I looked into it, and yeah, it's really going on. So it's really disturbing. I mean, I say in my book, these boys who play on college football teams who are making massive tens of millions of dollars for the university, they're bringing in more revenue than, like, the National Hockey League, right? College football today. They don't get paid. And do they really go to school? Some places. Most places they don't really. But they are campus celebrities, and they are, like, on campus with everybody really interested in hanging out with them. They do have, like, a certain amount of groupies, and the way I say it in my book is, like, maybe the payment's coming in women's bodies. Maybe the university even knows that's where the payment is coming. The biggest untold story, which is, somebody has to really go and report, is the rules of college football say you can't have hostess programs. What's a hostess program? It's when the recruits come, because you got to get these boys, right, to Baylor University. The recruits come, they need to be shown a good time. So who's going to show them a good time? Well, it might not be the cheerleaders, but it might be, like, the pep rally girls, right? Like the girls who just hang out a little bit and don't do all the big stunts. And they'll go out with the boys. This is what happened at Vanderbilt University, right? Even though the coach said he was not running a hostess program. There may have not been an official hostess program. But, there's a rape that happened at Vanderbilt where 4 boys assaulted a pep rally dancer when she was unconscious. That's what's happening. And those recruits are having sex with those girls. And there's a lot of, I mean, obviously there's a lot of premeditated rape that's happening in those situations. It's particularly football and basketball. They're not really finding trends in any other sport. But there's premeditated rape, but there's also like a lot of consensual sex that's happening between a football player and a girl who's hanging out and does want to have sex with that football player, but then his two friends come into the room and she didn't want to have sex with those two guys. And now she's in this situation, and how does she really get out of it? It's incredibly disturbing, and I do think those hostess programs really need to be investigated. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.